So Dan here for Six Towns Radio. A couple of days ago I did a post, being a part-time punter, that we're coming to the Grand National and how I choose what horse I'm going to probably lose money on. However, the man sitting next to me, his name is Jon, he's from the William Hill, actually from the bookmakers, and Jon is basically the professional in the industry here, well, who I'm going to talk to anyway. Jon, first of all, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Second of all, how do I win money?
That's a very, very complicated question when it comes to the Grand National. You've got 40 horses. Of all the races every year, this is the one time when all my mates turn to me, you know, who aren't necessarily racing punters, and they say, "Jon, tell us the winner of the National." And I say to them, of all the races of the year, this is the hardest. Why do you ask me now? Why can't you ask me when it's a 6-runner race or a 10-runner race? But a 40-runner race, it is the hardest one to pick, over 4.5 miles at Aintree, the toughest of all race courses. Well, it is hard. It is hard to pick a winner.
Before we go into the runners and who you think might win it, you mentioned mates who don't usually bet. This is one of the few events in the world that forces. For me, it used to be my grandma. He's like, "Go put some money on. I've got a good feeling about this." I'm like, "You don't watch horse racing. You don't watch horse racing the whole time." But the Grand National, she's a professional. That's how it was. What is it like for the bookmakers? Do you see a spike in people going, bets this way? Is this one of the busiest times?
Absolutely, it's the busiest and biggest horse race of the whole year.
I'm glad you said it right.
I think you're right. I mean, it's that race where the general public, so not your race punters, the people who are having a bet every single day on horse racing, it is that time of year when everybody goes and they say, well, I'm going to have an office sweepstake, for example, or they're going to go and put £1 or £2 on a horse which they probably have never heard of and they've chosen by name or the colour of the silks, or they just like the jockey, whatever it happens to be. And there's no right or wrong way of doing it. I have to say that, you know, sometimes you know those mates who never watch a horse race the entire rest of the year, some of them are just as good at picking the winner because it is a bit of a lottery.
I imagine it is very annoying for the regular punters when they study it. They probably look at it from last year's National and go, right, this is the form, and they've got like probably wall charts, go through every race that every horse has taken part of, and then you've got somebody who just goes in, puts on a random £5 bet on an outsider, and that has a very realistic chance of making somebody a lot of money. And the punter who's going, I've tried everything, and my horse is probably still running. That always happens to me. I always feel like the horse is still running. It could still run now and it wouldn't run. That's what happened. What do you do? Obviously you're in the industry.
Yeah.
How do you decide on backing a horse, especially in the National?
So the Grand National is one of those unique races where you need to have a combination of stamina and ability. Because it is 4.5 miles, there's no other horse race like it at all. It requires that extra bit of ability in terms of being able to see out that distance. You're looking for the Mo Farahs, the Paula Radcliffes, those sort of horses, not necessarily your Usain Bolts who could win over the short distances. So there's a special quality in a Grand National horse. Last year's winner, Many Clouds, for example, he has it in abundance. He will stay all day. He could probably run to Scotland and back, and he'd still have lots of energy left. That's the sort of horse who makes a perfect Grand National runner. Of the other attributes you're looking for a horse that is going to jump well. Because those Grand National fences are so tricky, you think about Beecher's Brook, the famous Beecher's Brook, or the Chair. They're often, when you're watching the race, those will be the ones where you kind of get a bit tense and you think, oh God, I'm glad I'm not the jockey in this position because that looks scary. It is scary for the jockeys. They go over those Grand National fences and they have a bit of tension inside them. But you need to have a horse that jumps those fences, the ability to really spring over them and have a bit left afterwards.
They've made the course over time safer for horse and jockey. Does that make it easier for it, or is it just the same complications going around? The same, obviously the fences are still high, no matter how kind of, you know, how they do it. It's still ridiculous when you look at it.
Yeah.
Does that make a change on what kind of horse would win it, or is it a case of, again, it is the one that can go the furthest distance, the fastest?
Well, there's a few changes that have happened over the last 3 years. 3 years ago, they brought in some changes in terms of safety, which, on one hand, you had people saying if they're going to make the height of the fences a bit lower, it's going to be a good thing because they might be less likely to fall. But actually, on the other hand, you had people, other experts saying that because the height of the fences reduces, they might go quicker, which might be more dangerous. Yeah. As it's turned out, over the last 3 years, we've not had a fatality in the Grand National, no horses dying in the race, which can only be a good thing because the safety of the horses has to be paramount. And I think that the other aspect over the last few years has been the change in the way they weight the race. So, because it's a handicap, and I won't go into too much detail because somebody starts talking handicaps and they're not a race fan and they start switching off and they're going to sleep and putting the kettle on. But because it's a handicap, they're weighted differently. So the better horses carry a heavier weight, and the horses who have a lower rating carry a less on their back. So in this instance, the weighting has changed a bit over the last few years, and the ones towards the top of the weights, carrying a bit more, are at a slightly better advantage than it would have been 3 years ago.
Yeah. On to the this year's race then. Obviously, many clouds won it last year. A lot of happy people backed that as well.
Yeah.
Do you see this early on? Obviously, we were filming this on Wednesday. Do you see any standouts so far in the race?
Yeah, I mean,
just for the benefit, write these down because these are what you need the money to go on.
Well, look, I'll give you 4 or 5 that I can give you good reasons from a professional perspective as to why they might run a big race.
Yeah.
The first one has to be last year's winner, Many Clouds. He won it last year for a reason. He's a very good horse. He won a race at Kelso last time, and it was a winning performance. He comes into the race in good form. There's every reason to think he'll run a big race again this year. The second one I put up is Silviniaco Conti. This is from my perspective, I think he's the best horse in the race. He has the ability. He won the King George a couple of times, which is one of the best chases around. He is trained by Paul Nicholls, who's the champion trainer, and he's been aimed at this race all year. So those are lots of good reasons why. Plus he won at Ascot last time, a very good race last time, and he scored a very high rating with the handicapper on that basis as well. So that's lots of good reasons to put forward Silviniaco Conti. There's a horse called Goon Yeller. If you're a fan of going to Uttoxeter Racecourse, which is obviously nearby, this horse won the Midlands Grand National. He's got plenty of ability, comes over from Ireland, and Irish horses have a good record in the race. I'd also say that last year's runner-up Saint R has another good chance again this year for trainer Tom George. He's definitely got the ability to get round, which, that's the first question. You've got to get a horse that is going to complete the course. We know he can do that. I think he'll do so again. The Druid's Nephew is another one that appeals to me. He's a horse who has run some good races over the course of the last 2 years, and I think has the ability to win it. I could name you 39 horses, and it'd be the 40th one that would win it. But if I had to put my money on one horse, it'd be a horse called Shut the Front Door. Plenty of reasons for this. 9-year-olds have the best record of any age in the race. Barry Geraghty is a very, very solid jockey to have in the saddle. Of the others, John Joe O'Neill is an expert at training staying chasers, so these marathon horses who can win races like the Grand National. He finished 5th in the race last year, and I think he can run just as well, perhaps even better this year. So Shut the Front Door would be my pick if I had one. But hey, however you pick it, just gamble responsibly and never bet more than you can afford.
Yeah, I think that's obviously another thing with the National is you don't have people putting, well, you get people putting on a ridiculous amount, but for the people who just go into betting for that one race, it's usually no more than a £5 limit, and that's obviously a good way to look at it, because no matter what, if you do each way, you're going to win a bit of money off the National anyway, especially with the odds which you get on some. If you're not in the top 5, then the odds that you get, especially with William Hill as well. William Hill give great odds. Look at that, straight in there. John, thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
If Shut the Front Door doesn't win, William will have to give me the money back.
It depends how much you put on.
I mean, what we're looking at. Off camera, we'll talk off camera. As John said, gamble responsibly, and however you do bet, best of luck if you are putting money on the National.